In this video, you're gonna learn how to crush technical SEO in Webflow. These strategies that I'm about to share with you are the same strategies I implemented on a small Webflow website, which ended up ranking really good. In fact, we even outranked Forbes, WWF, as well as some industry-leading sites for certain keywords. When you're starting out, technical SEO can be quite tricky. There's just so much to learn, and it's normal that you feel overwhelmed. But if you watch this video until the end and you follow along, you're gonna have a good grasp of what the best practices are. We're gonna break down technical SEO into three interconnected categories: baseline optimization, accessibility, and core web vitals. Now, without further ado, let's jump right into it. So what is baseline optimization? Baseline optimization is very basic SEO optimization that should be done on every site. The first item in this category that we're going to break down are title tags. So what are title tags and how do we set them up for clients? A title tag is essentially a code tag that lets you give a title to a page. Now, this should be very descriptive, but also short. It should tell what the page is all about. It is also a good place to sprinkle in one or more keywords, or if you're having a keyword phrase. It is also the first thing that people see in Google. The ideal length is somewhere around 50 to 60 characters. So if we Google something, let's say SEO tips, you see this first line over here, that's the title tag. And ideally, you want to keep it around 50 to 60 characters. Otherwise, you will have these ellipses here if the text is longer. So how do we add a title tag to our page? Let's head over to Webflow and see how to do this. So we're in Webflow here, and if we click here on the page and on this icon over here, this will open the page settings. And if we scroll down here, you can see that we have this field under SEO settings that says title tag. And here we can write what this page is all about. So in my example, I'm gonna write, learn how to improve your illustration and lettering, or simply learn lettering and illustration. Okay, and here I'm gonna write the name of the company. And I'm gonna hit save. Now, you might be thinking, okay, this is for static pages, but what about dynamic pages? How do we add a title tag to a dynamic page? And let's say here we're having a blog post template. And if you would write a title tag here, that would be applied to all of these blog posts that get published inside of this collection. So the best way to handle this is to go to CMS here, go under blog posts and add a field for the title tag. So here I'm gonna add a new plain text field and I'm gonna call it title tag. And I can also write in brackets SEO to let the client know that this is something SEO related. Now, here I can also set the maximum character count to 60 characters, or since we're gonna add also shout bomb, that is 10 characters, 11 with the space, so I can just write here 49 characters. Okay, and I'm gonna hit save here. So I'm limiting the number of characters here so that it's easier for the client to keep the right length of the title tag. So we're gonna hit save here. And now all we have to do is bind that field to our dynamic pages. So if we go to our dynamic page over here and we go to the page settings, we can add that field here. All we have to do is click on add field, title tag. And here at the end, we can write also shout bam. Now, this blog post doesn't have any title tag yet. So let's add that quickly and let's see how this will look. Now in this case, I'm gonna keep it the same as the title. Now, if the client would like to change it, they can do that later. Okay, and I'm going to paste this in here. Okay, I'm going to hit save. And now if we go to our blog post template settings and we look here at the title, we can see that this is how our title tag will look. And the next topic we're going to cover is meta description. You might have noticed below the title tag that we have this field called meta description. A meta description summarizes the content of your page. It benefits both the user as well as the search engines. Now, often the results that show up in Google right below the title tag are meta descriptions. We can have a look at that here right over here. So sometimes this will be a random paragraph from the page. Sometimes this content here will be the meta description. So how long should this meta description be? Ideally, it should be between 50 and 160 characters according to Moz, but it can be up to 300. So on static pages, you can simply write your meta description right here in the page settings, but on dynamic pages, you should set the meta description up the same way we did earlier with the title tag. So first we go to a collection, let's say the blog post. We add a field called meta description. It's just plain text. Here I'm going to limit this to 150 characters and I'm going to write here in the brackets SEO. Once I hit save, I can connect that field to our dynamic pages. So I'm going to scroll down here to the blog post template. And here, I'm simply going to drop my meta description field. Once I hit save, we're all set. And our next topic is Open Graph settings. This is essentially the information that shows up when we're sharing content on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Pinterest, and so on. Now, you might have noticed these fields here, and as you can see, we have an Open Graph title, an Open Graph description, and we can add an Open Graph URL. This is the image that shows up when you share a website on Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. Now, how do we add that? All you have to do is go here to the asset panel, click on this icon on an image that you have uploaded and copy this to clipboard. Then you can head back to your page settings and all you have to do is paste this in here. And that's it. Once you hit save, if you share your page on social media, this is what people will see. Our next tip is to keep URLs short. You might have noticed that when you add a title to a collection item, Webflow creates a URL for you. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not so great. Usually it's a good practice to keep it as short as possible, and you should do that for 3 reasons. First, short URLs tend to rank better than long URLs, and there's a study by Backlinko to back this up. Also, it's easier to read and it's easier to remember. So instead of having a slug or a URL like this, we could delete this over here and all of this here because that's not so important. So we have isometric letters in Procreate now. Also, if you're changing the URL, make sure to add redirects to prevent any broken links. If you don't know what that is or how to set it up, don't worry, we're gonna get to that in a little bit. Next, avoid thin or duplicate content. If every page on your site is truly unique, then you don't have to worry about this. However, if you're using a CMS, then duplicate content can easily creep onto your site. For example, if you're allowing the user to sort through blog posts with tags and with categories, you might have the same page under 2 different URLs. Now, what's the solution for duplicate content? How can you resolve this? The first solution is an obvious one, and it's to add unique descriptions to each one of your category pages. This way, your telling Googlebot that each page is slightly different from the other. The other option is to simply have everything on one page. With something like the Finsweet CMS filter, you can sort and filter through blog posts without leaving that page. And the last option is to simply tell Google not to rank certain categories. By adding a no index tag, you're telling Googlebot that it should not spend time on this page, but instead it should spend more time on other pages that are more important, ensuring that these ones are ranking. Now, if you do this with the third option, then you're gonna have an error in your Search Console, but this is the only time when you actually want to have an error in your Search Console. Next, you wanna set global canonical tags. Sometimes things will get appended to your URL. Sometimes an article from your site will be republished on another platform. And in these cases, you want to let Google know what the original piece of content is. By adding a canonical tag, you ensure that Google understands that this is still your original page. This way, search engines know what is the proper URL to index. So how do you do this in Webflow? All you have to do is go to Project Settings, SEO, and scroll all the way to the bottom here. Here, you can set your global canonical URL. If you paste your URL here, then Webflow will automatically append the slug to this URL over here. Once you set this up, you can hit save and simply publish your site. Once your site is published, it's time to add your site to Google's Search Console. Search Console tools give you access to Google search data. If anything goes wrong, you can find information there. It also allows you to submit your sitemap so that your site is indexed in Google search results. To do that, all you have to do is go to Google Search Console and log into your Google account. There, you can add a new property from the property dropdown. Choose URL prefix and type in your domain with the HTTPS protocol. Choose the HTML tag option under Other Verification Methods. Copy the verification ID. This is this thing right over here, and don't close the window. Open your Webflow dashboard, go to your project's SEO settings, and paste the verification ID you copied in the Google Site Verification field. Save the changes and publish your site. Once the verification process is completed, you can submit your website to Google for indexing. Note that you only need to do this once. Now that we talked about submitting your site to Google, how do we actually do this? Here's where sitemaps come in. A sitemap is essentially a page on your site that tells search engines like Google how to crawl your website, where the pages are located, when have they been updated, and so on. Now, you don't have to do this manually. Luckily, Webflow does that automatically for you. Under Project Settings, if you click on the SEO tab, you have a section here called Sitemap. And here, if you click on this switch over here, Webflow will automatically generate a sitemap for you. This sitemap can be found under your URL here, your website, and then /sitemap. So here you want to write yoursite.com/sitemap. So let's copy only this part, sitemap.xml, and let's save our changes and publish our page. Next, we're going to head over to our Search Console, and here under Sitemaps, we're going to submit our sitemap. And that's it. Now Google can start indexing our website. If we add new pages in the future, this will get automatically updated here. Next, make sure to have the right heading structure. What does this mean? Think of headings as topics and subtopics. Your H2 should be a subtopic of your H1. Your H3 should be a subtopic of your H2, and so on. Also, make sure to have only one H1 on your page. This H1, or your main heading, should reinforce whatever you wrote in your title tag and meta description. The next tip is to make sure not to skip a heading level. If you do skip a heading level, you will get an error in the audit panel. So Webflow will let you know that you skipped a heading level. Now, having the right heading structure benefits both humans and search engines, and it makes it easier to understand the hierarchy of topics on your page. And the next tip is to add image alt tags. Alt tags help people with screen readers understand what's on your image. Also, if the image fails to load, the alt tags show as a placeholder for your image. Now, alt tags fall in both categories, baseline optimization as well as accessibility. Keep your alt tags descriptive. For example, don't write blog thumbnail image. Instead, write what's on the image. In this case here, where I'm having this image over here, I would write something like paper cut ampersand. Like this. Now, in this case, this would be not the preferred option because this will apply this alt tag to each and every blog post image. What I should do instead here is get the alt tag from the blog post here. So I'm going to select here from this drop down main image alt tag. And that's it. Now this is a field that I added dynamically to the blog post collection. The other ways of adding alt tags to your images are by selecting a static image and simply adding a custom alt tag description. For example, here, if I select this, I could add here a custom description. But a preferred option would be to get the description from the asset panels, because this way, whenever I add this image somewhere else on my site, it will have the alt tag already applied. To add an alt tag to an image, all I have to do is go to the settings over here and under these details, write my alt tag here. Remember to always add alt tags to your images unless their purpose is to be purely decorative. Now that we covered baseline optimization, let's look into accessibility. So what is web accessibility and why is it so important? Web accessibility is the act of making sure that your site is accessible and usable for everyone. Accessibility can be viewed as the ability to access and benefit from a site no matter if the user is having a disability or not. Web accessibility means that anyone at any moment can use your website. Now you might be thinking, why should I use this? Why should I optimize for accessibility? It's such a small group of people. And if you're thinking that, you're absolutely wrong. There are more people who are disabled permanently or temporarily than you might think. So there are three groups of disabled people. There are permanently disabled users, which are users that have a severe disability like blindness or deafness. There are temporary disabled users which had, for example, an accident or are temporarily physically or mentally disabled, which doesn't allow them to function and process information normally at this point. And there are conditional or situationally disabled people. These are users that are not able to do things due to the current situation they are in. For example, if the user is having a crappy internet connection or if they're browsing while eating and so on. Making your site accessible will also give you massive SEO boosts. In this video, we're merely gonna scratch the surface about accessibility. But if you want to learn more about accessibility, there are a lot of resources that you can check out. Definitely check out Webflow's accessibility checklist, the A11Y project checklist, and the Finsweet accessibility for Webflow. I'm gonna link to all of these resources in the description below. Now, without further ado, let's start optimizing. Our first accessibility tip is ensuring that your site is mobile friendly. Before you even start thinking about accessibility, make sure that people can access your site from their phones. To make sure that you're not having any unwanted horizontal scroll on any of your devices and that the site is not breaking on smaller breaking points, all you have to do is publish your site and then on the published site, right-click, inspect, and from this drop-down on top here, you can choose several devices. You can see how it looks on a few phones, you can see how the site looks on an iPad Pro, and you can also see how the site looks on different desktop sizes. Once you make sure that your site is not falling apart on any of the breaking points and that you're not having any unwanted horizontal scroll, then you can move forward to the next optimizations. Our next tip is to make your typography accessible. The first thing that you should do is set your typography in rems instead of pixels. By using rems, the users can change the browser's default font size. For example, you might have noticed that someone older than you or one of your friends is having really large letters on your phone, on their phone. And by setting your font size in pixels, you're overriding these default settings. And this can lead to a really bad experience, and some people might not be able to read your site. So if you want to avoid that, make sure to use rems instead. Next, make sure that you have enough contrast between the text and the background. I mentioned this already, but it's important to mention this once again. Here you have this text color contrast checker in Webflow, and make sure that you're using it. Next, set your line height for paragraphs between 1.3 and 1.7. But if you're setting it to 2.0, that's also okay. Just make sure it's never under 1.3. Next, use highly legible fonts. Legibility refers to how easily you can distinguish between different characters of the font. Especially, you should pay attention to I, L, and I, M, and N, and so on. Here's an example of a font with bad legibility. And here is a font that's highly legible. Your line length for paragraphs and for blog posts should be between 45 and 75 characters per line. More than 75 looks a little bit hard to read, especially if you go over 90, and less than 45 can also be a little bit annoying since your text will be very narrow. The ideal line length is between 45 and 75 characters per line. Next, use left alignment for most of the text on your site, especially for longer text blocks. If you're having a headline, it's okay to align it centrally. But if you're having a blog post, you definitely don't want to align it centrally. Make sure it's aligned to the left. Why? Because it's much easier to read since your eye has an anchor point at the start of the next line. When it comes to your site's structure, you should aim for a flat structure. This means that the user can access any page on your site with as few clicks as possible. Here is an example of a good structure, and here's an example of a bad site structure. The best tip is to keep your most important pages at the top level, so as high as possible, and the least important ones at the bottom. Also, make sure that you don't have any orphan pages. Orphan pages are pages that are not linked to from any page on your site. And our next tip is to make a sitemap page that's accessible from your homepage. Remember earlier when we talked about XML sitemaps? Well, you should build a sitemap for humans too. This can be a simple page that contains links to every page on your site. Not only does this help keep a flat structure, but it also helps users find what they're looking for really fast. And the best part about it is that you're minimizing the chance of having orphan pages. Next tip, build internal links where it makes sense. So when does it make sense to add internal links? It really boils down to your site. Some great examples are recommended products, related posts, and links inside of paragraphs. Also, Google pays attention to what is written inside of hyperlinks, so avoid using generic labels like read more, see page, etc. Instead, write something more descriptive like learn more about technical SEO tips. Now it's time to move to our next tip, using breadcrumb navigation. Adding breadcrumb navigation to your site helps orienting the user. At any moment, the user can see where exactly they are. Besides offering a better user experience, you're also building useful internal links on your site. Next, we have semantic HTML tags. Another way to help search engines and people understand our content is by using semantic HTML tags. Inside of Webflow, when you select an element and you switch over to the settings panel, you'll notice that we have this drop-down over here. Here we can select the element's HTML tag. Okay, great. Now, what are these tags? What do we do with these? These tags help people with screen readers and search engines interpret your content. The first three sectioning elements that we're going to cover are header, main, and footer. Header describes the header of your website. Usually, your nav bar is your website's header. The main element should be used to wrap the main content of your page. In most cases, everything except the header and the footer. And the footer tag should be added to your footer section. The next semantic tag we're going to look into is nav. Nav stands for navigation. Any navigation list on your page should have a nav tag. Navbar links, footer links, sidebar links, and even breadcrumbs can be wrapped in nav tags. Your main should be divided into sections. Now, adding a sectioning element to your page will not do the trick. You need to use a section tag as well. On this page, we have several sections. So let's change these section elements to sections. Note that you don't have to use Webflow's native section elements. You can add a section tag to any div element as well. Next, we have article. The article tag specifies independent, self-contained content. This can be a blog post, articles, forum posts, or news. Then we have aside. An aside defines content that's aside from the main page content, like a sidebar, ads, or a pop-up. This is content that's only indirectly related to the page's content. Lastly, we have the address tag. The address tag defines contact information. The contact information can be an email address, a URL, a physical address, a phone number, social media handle, and so on and so forth. Next, remove any broken internal links. Broken links can easily creep onto your website. You link to a resource, that page moves without a 301, and there you have it, the link is broken. If you link to a site and they change the URL, that's not really a biggie in terms of SEO. In fact, Google even stated that broken outbound links don't affect your rankings. But broken internal links are another story. If you have any internal broken links, make sure to fix these as soon as possible. You can download an extension called Check My Links, which will show you if you have any broken links on your site. Our next accessibility tip is to use simple language. With that, not only are you helping people with mental disabilities, but you're also helping everyone else. For example, some people might not be native English speakers. Some people are maybe reading in a rush. And by using simple lingo, you're helping everyone out. So avoid technical jargon and keep the sentences short and easy to understand. Our next tip is to add your website to Google My Business. This tip is especially important if you're a local business. It helps you get found on Google Maps as well as in Google search results. All you have to do is go to google.com/business and follow the sign-up process. Once you're done, you're going to get a letter delivered to your mailbox so that you can verify your physical address. And that's it. And finally, we have Core Web Vitals. Crafting a great user experience is the best SEO strategy. A good UX signals to Google that the site is useful and relevant. Many of the topics we already covered are going to improve the user experience. Title tags help the users discover your site, a flat structure helps users find the information they need, and so on. But there are also other quality signals that are important for delivering a great user experience on the web. Specifically, loading, how long the site takes to load. We will refer to this as LCP, or largest contentful paint. Interactivity, how long a site takes to become interactive. We will refer to this as FID, or first input delay. Visual stability, is the site stable while it's being loaded? We will refer to this as CLS, or cumulative layout shift. These metrics are called Core Web Vitals. Recently, Google started measuring these quality signals, and they play an important role in SEO. If your site is performing bad across these metrics, you're probably going to see a drop in organic traffic. In this part of the video, we're going to learn how to optimize your Webflow site for Core Web Vitals. First, we're going to tackle LCP and FID. So, what are FID and LCP? The largest contentful paint, or LCP, measures how long a site takes to load. So, what causes poor LCP? Poor LCP is caused by slow server response time, render blocking JavaScript or CSS, slow resource load times, and client-side rendering. FID is the first input delay, and it measures how long it takes a page to become interactive. Poor FID is caused by long tasks, long JS execution, large JavaScript bundles, and render blocking JavaScript. With FID, you also tackle LCP and vice versa. Okay, so what can you do about this? First, you can self-host fonts. Webflow supports Google Fonts by default. If you choose a Google font, a request is made to the Google API and the font is loaded on your site. Unfortunately, this process is slowing down your Webflow website. Just check out this site's performance with and without Google Fonts. If you want to use a Google font on your site without slowing your site significantly, you can self-host it. Simply downloading the font won't do the trick since you'll get a TTF file which is not ideal for the web. If you want to download a WOF2 file, you'll have to do a bit of digging. First, select the fonts that you want. In this example, I'm choosing two weights, regular and bold. Once you selected these styles, copy this link over here and paste it in the address bar. Once this is loaded, find the fonts you want to use and select the URLs. Right-click on your selection and click on Go to that page. This will start a download right away. Then all you have to do is upload that file to Webflow and voila! You can use this font without slowing your site significantly. Our next tip is to avoid using reCAPTCHA if you can. Adding a native reCAPTCHA block to your site slows it down significantly. The worst thing is that once you add it to a site, the script will get loaded on every page on your website, even after you deleted it, which is an absolute pain. Instead, if you really have to add it to your project, use custom code to do this. Also, add it only on the page you need it, don't add it globally. Next, minify your code. To do that, all you have to do is go to your project settings and tick all of these boxes. Next, don't overuse interactions. Webflow interactions are awesome, and it's easy to get tempted to animate every element on your site. But these complicated JavaScript interactions come at a price. Too many interactions can slow down your site by a lot. Now, for a showcase website like a portfolio, that's usually not a big deal since you're most likely not getting all of your traffic from SEO. But if you're having a blog or product, you might be missing out on a lot of organic traffic. So what can you do about it? You can do two things. First, you can use as few Webflow interactions as possible, and second, you can use CSS animations whenever possible. All of the interactions and animations that you can create in the Styles panel are CSS animations. These animations are way lighter and they won't affect your site's performance as much. There are even some more advanced CSS animations that you can do if you know how to write custom CSS, like affecting the child of an element or playing with pseudo elements. Next, delete unused interactions. Once you're done playing with the interaction panel, make sure to delete unused interactions. This is as easy as a click of a button. Also, delete unused CSS. Once your site is ready to go live, delete all unused CSS. You can do that by clicking on the Style Manager panel and clicking on Cleanup. Note that this might delete classes that you're using somewhere in your custom code, so be careful with that. We also created a Webflow extension that will help you delete only the classes that are on one particular page. So make sure to check that out. Next, delete any non-critical JavaScript. If you have any third-party scripts on your site, go through them and delete anything you no longer need. That comment widget that no one used in years, delete it. This cool social sharing widgets or whatever, build your own in Webflow and delete that custom third-party stuff you have. For those scripts that are essential, there's a way to optimize them with custom code. We went through that in another video to which I'm going to link right over here. Next, optimize your images. The first thing that you can optimize on your site are images. Keep your images at the size they should be in or just a little bit bigger. If you have a container that's 1080 pixels wide and your image is spanning across one column only, then there's no need to upload an image that's bigger than the container itself. Instead, resize the image to the width of the parent element. Or, if the quality looks bad, make sure it's just a little bit bigger. You can also make it exactly twice the size to optimize for retina displays if you want to. And also make sure to check this box on static files. Just make sure you're not having images that are bigger than that. Properly sized images can improve your website speed significantly. Once your images are properly sized, make sure to compress them before uploading them to Webflow. You can compress or minify your images with free tools like compressor.io for JPEGs or tinypng for PNG files. These tools will help you reduce your file size without compromising quality. Next, we have lazy loading. Once your images are uploaded, make sure to lazy load all of the images that appear below the fold. Webflow lazy loads all the images by default nowadays. On older sites, you still have to do this process manually. For those images that appear above the fold, you can set the loading to eager if you want them to appear as soon as possible. And finally, we have CLS. What is CLS? CLS is cumulative layout shift. Let's look at an example. Here you can see that on this side, as soon as the page is getting loaded, this banner appears out of nowhere and pushes all the content down. This is cumulative layout shift in action, and this is causing a bad experience essentially. So what is causing CLS? CLS is caused by images without dimensions, by ads, embeds, and iframes without dimensions, by dynamically injected content, or by web fonts that are causing a flash of unstyled content. Alright, now that we know what's causing CLS, how can we avoid it? The first thing you can do is animate elements by using transform properties instead of messing with the width and height of an element. Next, avoid inserting elements above other elements unless it is triggered with a user interaction, like opening an accordion, for example. The next tip is to always include size attributes on your images and video elements. It's easy to look up the dimensions of an image and simply write that in the size attributes of the image. This way, the browser will reserve the right aspect ratio for that image that's about to be loaded. If you know how to write custom code, you could also reserve space for dynamically injected content by using something like aspect ratio boxes. And congratulations, you made it until the end. I hope you found value in this video, and if you did, please consider subscribing to our channel so that we can notify you when we release a new video. I know this video was a little heavy and there were a lot of optimizations, but if you followed along and you enjoyed this type of content, then make sure to check also our advanced guide to technical SEO. There, we also covered some advanced optimizations with a little bit of custom code, but if you follow along, you should have no troubles implementing this. Alright, thank you for watching and see you next time.